What's going on, everybody? Patrick OJ here with Mr. Matthew Wells. And today we're talking about a pretty serious subject in terms of fighter safety and fighter health. So, if you haven't heard the news, BJ Penn once again has been arrested on suspicion of DUI. I know there have been some follow up reports, but at this point, I don't know that they've confirmed it or not. It's possible they have it. I missed that. But this is more trouble with the law for BJ. He's been, knocked out 7 times in his last 8 fights. And then he had a draw in another one and was cut from the UFC essentially because Dana saw some footage of him getting knocked out on the street in a bar fight. Man clearly has a problem, has a bit of an addiction, could be, in regards to the other injuries that come along with fighting, right? This isn't the first time we've seen this stuff. Spencer Fisher's story that just came out on MMAfighting.com by Steven Morocco and a bunch of other people at that website that put that together. I mean, highlights some of the injuries and what fighters do later on in their careers and in life, right? I mean, CTE is no joke. So you've got a long, and this is just more recent stuff. You've got a long storied history of fighters having issues and having mental health problems, having, substance abuse issues. Irwin Rivera, another huge, issue that just came up with terms of this whole sister thing. War Machine, if we go down that route, right? I mean, this is the storied legacy of MMA in some ways. And the question becomes, is the UFC and other promotions, not just them, MMA promotions in general in the industry, are they doing enough for fighter health? I mean, we've heard about some of the money they've started donating towards the Cleveland Clinic Institute to look into, CTE and brain trauma therapy, things of that nature. They've looked into psychedelics. They've paid for fighters, surgeries and various issues while they've been under contract. But I don't know, Matt, is this, how does this whole situation feel to you in terms of what promotions in general are doing for fighter health? Are we at a point where it's enough right now and it's just, these are just some sad outliers?
It's kind of hard to say because I don't think that they really are doing enough. But at the same time, it's like, how much can they really do without having some sort of, responsibility for what happens to these fighters, right? Because that's like part of the thing, like with the NFL. And I know that the NFL, they were burying information and they weren't relaying it to their players. And then that's why they had that huge lawsuit recently. But I don't know how far these MMA promotions can go other than just being upfront, with fighters and say, hey, you're stepping into the cage to hit another human being in the head. There's a strong possibility that you're going to also be hit in the head. That's going to have long-term health effects. So outside of just being open and honest with them, I don't know how far they could go. I mean, ideally, you mentioned the, Dana talking about recently doing the research into things, but I personally would like to see a new addition to the UFC, the UFC City area out there in Vegas, dedicated just to health, like mental health and recovery. Add that on to the PI somehow, right? I'm not sure what all they're doing in terms of that, if anything, at the PI right now, besides just, physical well-being and physical recovery when it comes to the massages and things like that and the hot tubs and all that stuff. Is there a mental health component to the PI right now? If not, there should be, because seeing these headlines like BJ Penn arrested under investigation for DUI, when just last February we had another one, same headline. And then you go back even further than that, BJ Penn again in another headline for this similar issue. Drunk and, like you mentioned, the bar fight, which essentially got him kicked out of the UFC for good, finally, even though he should have been kicked out of the UFC about 6 fights before that because he just wasn't there competitively, right? So there's a lot of questions that surround this, and it's really tough to figure out the correct answer right now. But I do like to hear things like Dana was saying that, hey, we are doing research into this thing, but I need to know more than just Dana giving lip service to it. I need to see what's actually being put in place with the fighters that are, going through it now, that aren't seeing these these effects just yet, but have a high possibility of seeing it. You know, you think of all the fighters that have the war after war after war. We love to watch it as fans, but you know, me personally, every time I see that, like for example, with Dan Hooker this past weekend, I was like, please don't get into another war. I'm concerned about you because you've been in like a lot of hard back and forth battles in recent years. And then he gets completely knocked out and starts. And I mean, like, well, that's just as bad in a way. So it's tough, man. It's a tough subject. And I don't really know the right way to address it, but I don't think they are doing enough to answer your question. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, it is an extremely tough question to answer, right? It's one of those things too. You have to consider, right, that for some people they have these issues and they don't want help or they won't accept it, and that's a whole nother type of thing. And
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, in those situations, you can't do much. You can offer it, you can do what you can, but if someone repeatedly refuses help or chooses to go down that road, you can't really stop them. So that's a component to this as well. But that being said, you know, I look at this a lot like I believe it was Real Sports with Brian Gumbel a while back, did a great look at WWE, right? And their issues, because you had a lot of the same thing. A lot of, yes, while you're under contract with us, while you're wrestling with us, we give you health insurance, all that. But you had, you know, several wrestlers, which you can still see today, doing GoFundMe's for different injuries that they've, you know, felt in the ring or had in the ring. And we've heard about that too from wrestler or from fighters on their end, where yes, they need to raise money for a surgery. I need to figure this out, because it's one of those situations. You've got $1 billion corporation making all of this money, and then the fighters who are a huge part of that, or wrestlers in the WWE, same type of thing, they are struggling just for these injuries and these things that they've done to help make the company as profitable as it is. And as you mentioned, like the PI, I think is a great step in the right direction. I'm glad the UFC did that. I think it's a great resource for fighters from the physical side. They definitely need a mental health component in there. They probably need if they don't have it already, a substance abuse or wellness type of clinic in there as well, based on how many fighters we've seen this happen to. And it's hard to balance that line in terms of what is the promotion's responsibility and what is the fighter's. Because as a fighter, you know, as you said, you got to know to some degree you're going to get hurt. That if you go in there, you could very well end up with really bad, you know, trauma to your head that ends up in CTE. Look at Gary Goodridge. I mean, that video that's out there on YouTube, if you Google it, Gary Goodridge and CTE, that thing is heartbreaking. It sucks to watch, but it's a real thing that's out there. And you read the Spencer Fisher story where they were essentially paying him I think it was $5,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Once he retired, which sounds like they were trying to help him out, but once the new owners came in, they said, yeah, you know what, we're kind of done with that. And he stopped getting that money. And it's a reason, it's a big part of what Leslie Smith and the unions were also fighting for too. A lot of people talk about fighter pay. They talk about, you know, more leverage. Yes, those are big parts of a fighter's union. But another component that is always mentioned and always overlooked, because everybody's talking about the pay or talking about contracts and all of that, is health insurance. They say they want health insurance and pensions, retirement funds, so that they can pay for things like this. Fighters don't have that right now. When you're done, you're done. That's it. The UFC can give you money, can help you out, but they don't have to. They're under no obligation. And that is where it becomes kind of a bit more where I'm on the side that there needs to be something done similar to what was done in the NFL in some regards. And I don't know if anything got set up for the WWE. I don't believe it did, but some type of fund that's, hey, this is something is here for fighters to draw on if they suffer these horrific injuries, because that's how the UFC got their money in their name. That's how Bellator got their money in their name. All of these promotions, PFL, that's trying to make it right, trying to strike it out as a new format and do all that, they're getting that publicity because you need fighters in the tournaments. It's one championship and their whole spiel. Same type of deal. It's the fighters are the ones propelling your entire brand. You've got to find a way to take care of them more.
No, that's 100% accurate. I think one idea that just came to mind that would be pretty good to do, and the UFC would be on top of it, is you could make a fighter wellness fund, right? And you can have that open to the public for donations. Anytime a paying customer visits UFCstore.com, have that little pop up at the checkout. Would you like to donate $5 to the fighter wellness fund? Something like that. Every event, every venue, have those at the entrance or whatever. When you buy your tickets, have that be an option to donate to that. I think a lot of fans would be willing to shell out a few bucks for that, because if you're really a fan of the sport and you really have at least a little bit of care for how these athletes are, when they're said and done, then yeah, you might throw $5 more on top of the price of your ticket or on top of that t-shirt you buy. Why not? Why not? And as long as the UFC keeps it up on the up and up and actually put it towards research and, counseling and all sorts of things like that that can help these guys when they're done, that would be something really beneficial to do. Because right now there's nothing really like that for them. A lot of them have to go out on their own and find these things. I remember, I believe it was Rich Franklin who did a thing on one of those specials, one of those sports specials about mental health and stuff like that, and it was really intriguing and it was very interesting to see the things that can be done to help mitigate the CTE aspects of the brain trauma and stuff like that. I just want to see something. Just want to see something. Like, again, like Dana's saying, speaking on it for a two sentence response isn't really necessarily enough. So we also have to do our job as media and journalists out there to follow up with that kind of stuff and make sure that the appropriate steps are being taken to protect these guys and gals when they're done. So we just got to make sure that we're not just being fed the same lies that athletes have been fed in the past, so.
Yeah. And I think that's a great idea. What you're talking about in terms of especially a fund, right, where the fans themselves can donate a little bit to it. Or another idea that popped into my head while you were talking about that makes a lot of sense. We've seen them do these Omaze giveaways, right, where you purchase a bunch of tickets and then you get a special sit with Halle Berry and Dana White at UFC whatever, and they've got a free contest going on right now that's just, hey, like, you can be the first fans in the Apex, right, and sit live next to Apex, see the first pay-per-view in the Apex in this type of environment. Why not essentially say, hey, donate, do more things like that and have it be donations for getting into a random drawing to, again, meet Dana White or meet particular fighters or get a VIP experience and have that money go into a fighters fund. There are a lot of ways that this doesn't have to be the UFC just writing a big check and saying, fine, we'll fund a fighters fund. It's all on us. No, you don't have to do that. You can get creative with this and build more, sense of community as well as raise awareness for it. Because the more the fans know about it, the more they're going to be willing to donate as well, right? We as media are more sensitive to it. We interview these guys. We see what happens to them after they leave the sport a lot of the times. A lot of fans don't. A lot of fans just show up for the fights and they say, oh, right, Gary Goodrich? Yeah, he's the guy from back in the day. And that's probably the last they think about it. Some of them see the reporting we do and things of that nature on it. But, there's a lack of awareness on this stuff too. We talk about people taking damage. You talk about Dan Hooker. It wasn't that long ago that Tony Ferguson couldn't fight because of the issues he had going on, right? And he got it under control, but there was some scary stuff going on there for a minute. And when, Rodney, who we both know, asked the legitimate question about mental health, Tony shot it down and was booed and all that. And that was it. The promotion didn't follow up, didn't do anything there. But it's a serious point. The dude clearly had some mental things going on, and now he's back in the cage getting more head trauma. It's just raising awareness about this stuff and putting that type of fund together that they don't even have to, again, pay for themselves if they really don't want to. They can find ways to write it off and give fan experiences and have fans fund it, or sponsors. There's a million different ways you can look into that. That's more of what I would like to see as well, because I understand from a business side, yes, they're extremely profitable, but they're also right now they're basically just pumping money into Endeavor to keep it afloat, which is a whole other, you could go into the business side of that and why it's really taken the steam out of the UFC's very profitable past couple of years, but we won't. But I mean, at this point, still something like that is very doable, and I agree should happen 100%.
Yeah, you mentioned Tony Ferguson there, and let's also not forget another prominent example in Max Holloway. You go back to that Brian Ortega fight. That fight had to be postponed because he had that interview on on TV where Michael Bisping was like, "Whoa, you okay there, buddy?" Because Max, it seemed like he was drunk and high and a combination of all those things, but he was very much sober. He was just having concussion symptoms. So they had to check him out. And, eventually, everything was good. But whatever was happening on that particular day is very scary. Right. And of course, he went on to go out there and put on a just starching of Brian Ortega. But that's irrelevant because, that's something that's still going to pop up at some point again in his life. Right. And thankfully, we see him saying things like, after the Calvin Kattar fight, focusing on getting the message out there of, hey, guys, we don't have to spar hard. Especially, I love that he said that, because if you know how to fight, guys that really, really know how to fight and they're already at the top of their divisions, I don't understand why those guys are really sparring hard at all. You know what you need to do. You need to be drilling technique and make sure you're in shape, because you've already proven that you can throw hands. Like you've proven that you can dodge knockout punches more often than not, right? You know what to do in the pocket. It's just drilling technique and staying in shape at that point, and capitalizing monetarily as well while you're there at the top of the divisions. So it's something that we are seeing now from some of our favorite fighters. It's just like you said, journalists are and media guys like us that actually talk to these fighters from time to time are the ones that seem to care, outside of the fighters and their families.
Yeah, and even again, you brought up another great point there. Holloway made the smart decision, right? I remember being at the open workouts and watching Holloway. I think it was before the day before he did that interview, where then he eventually was pulled, and he looked off. I mean, even in the crowd, you could hear a couple of people saying, Max looks a little weird, huh? But that can happen. He was weight cutting. It's, open workouts, all that. So we didn't think anything of it. But Holloway, after that, made the smart decision, because that was a scary experience for him. And had he gone on to fight that night, very well could have crowned a new champion, because who knows what he would have looked like, and who knows what the extra damage would have done to him. So not every fighter does that, though. And that's another huge issue. You talk about Anderson Silva, where his kids are begging him to stop fighting, right? And he kept going back out there. Jose Aldo has said multiple times, I was going to retire. I'm going to go do other things. And then he's just going back at a lower weight class now. And we see these fighters come back out of retirement time and time again. Fedor Emelianenko, I mean, has not looked great. He's beaten some older guys, yes, but it's not like he's, looked good against any youth in Bellator's division. It's been pretty bad. And when it comes down to it, that's the type of thing too, where the promotion has to, do something in that regard, has to kind of protect fighters from themselves. Right. Mm-hmm. And I guess they don't have to technically, right, but they should. And I think a wellness fund and just some basic things, small things even, would go a long way in that regard, in terms of making it more of a norm to talk about this stuff. Because as you mentioned, when we talk about it, we're few and far between really getting into this stuff, really talking about the damages, things like that. Steven Morocco's story, few and far between with what's happened with fighters. And it happens a lot more than people talk about. So, yeah.
And unfortunately, we're in a place right now, especially with the UFC, where they're profit driven. So, as you touched on fighters retiring, ideally, like I would say, like, if you really are interested in protecting your fighter's health or former fighter's health, if they say they're retiring, there should be something in that retirement clause or whatever in the contracts or whatever that say, like, if you opt out of your contract early to retire, you must stay retired for a certain amount of time, right? And then if you do wish to return after this period of time, you have to pass a mental health screening and, prove that you're not only physically and mentally fit to return to action. But that's not going to happen, because if Conor McGregor says, I'm done tomorrow, and then next year says, hey, I'm back, the UFC is going to be like, great, money. Let's go. They're not going to care about where he is, health
He's
wise.
never done that before, so I don't know why he would.
That was a bad example to say Conor, but any other fighter that hasn't retired 50 times and come back, but it's just, they have to get, if they have to get over this point in their companies being to where they're not just driven for profit, because they're going to go where the dollar is more often than not. And if that means fighter health be damned for this one pay-per-view that we can make a few more $1 million on, then sorry, fighter, your health be damned this time around.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about the UFC, right? And it's
that
fair
goes for all promotions, yeah, across the board,
yeah. It's important to say this isn't just a UFC thing. This is PFL, this is One, this is Ryzen, this is all MMA promotions, right? And we know that obviously a lot of them are struggling just to break even or to turn a profit, but we know some of them that have. And when they have, if you're making millions of dollars off of the backs of these guys, at that point, you got to start considering it. It's just something that you really should do for longevity too, because at some point, it very well could come back to bite them. Look at the UFC antitrust lawsuit, right? Look at what the NFL players did in terms of suing the NFL about them suppressing information. I don't think any promotions are out there actively suppressing information right now, but this stuff is just, it's bad for business to kind of sweep it under the rug, because eventually, right, when this sport is newer. It has not been around for 100 years. It has not been, at least not with the visibility it has. It's really the past, I'd say 20 years is where it's really gotten its shine, with people really looking at it and watching it. And now it's more mainstream than it has been ever. And at that point, there's going to be a time when a lot of fighters now we've watched in their heydays, right? Chuck Liddell, Anderson Silva. We're already seeing some of it, but we're going to see them when they get older and see what they look like at the end. And that's really, a big part of it as well, is once some of these big name fighters get older, I think that'll kind of drive home the point of there's got to be a little bit more done here, especially if we get a bunch more people ending up like Gary Goodridge, which I hope doesn't happen, but at the same time, easily could. So let us know your thoughts in the comments, how you feel about this stuff. Do you feel that the promotions are doing enough? Do you feel that they should be doing more? Is it the fighter's responsibility because they know getting into the cage, hey, this is what I signed up for? Is it truly all on the promotion that, yeah, you've got to protect your people. You've got to do this. How do you guys feel about all this? And let us know. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you haven't done that already, hit the notification button so you know when we're dropping new videos. Matt, anything else to wrap up this one?
You touched on it right there, in that fighters also have their responsibility on this as well. It's not all on the promotions by any means. So if you made it this far in the video, please understand that point. I kind of touched on it with the Max Holloway thing. Shying away from the sparring, that's an important component to it. But they also have to do other things, like reach out for their own sort of, therapy when it comes to mental health. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. That is super important, especially when it comes to athletic recovery and your mental recovery as well. So they have their own responsibility. They've got to do their part as well. Don't do anything unnecessarily, don't take too many fights in a year, especially after you just got knocked out. Don't go. The biggest one for me is don't show up to training, 2-3 times a week and try to like get knocked out. Like that's way old school, super dangerous. Just be smart about how they're training too.
Yes. Yeah. I mean that's a great point to cap this all off. Is we've talked a lot about are the promotions doing enough, but again, this is not a one-way street. It is not the promotion's responsibility to do anything and everything and go above and beyond every step of the way to make sure these fighters are really, taking care of themselves. At some point, yes, they should help them out or be there as a resource, but it's the fighter's responsibility. When you step into a cage, if you think you're going to step into a cage and never take any sort of head trauma, then that's a whole nother evaluation that should be done as to whether you should be in a cage. And yes, train smarter. I mean, there's no need for the Pat Miletich system style of training that, growing up not far from there, I've heard stories like it's rough. And in the Spencer Fisher story, again, highlights that a lot. It's kind of confirmed pretty much everything I've heard. There's no need to go in there and be like, hey, we're going to haze the new guy by just beating the shit out of him for 15 minutes and trying to knock him out. No, like if that's the gym you're going to, get out immediately. And even as fans, if you're just going to an MMA gym or you're doing kickboxing, whatever, any of that fun stuff, if you're at a gym where they're allowing any of you to hard spar and you're not in a specific MMA program where you're trying to get a fight, then you need to reconsider, because that's not how gyms should be run. So again, just be smart about it. And hopefully we see less of this. Hopefully we get to talk more about stuff like the UFC putting money towards that clinic in Cleveland and, doing that type of stuff, because that's the stuff we like to see. So hopefully as the sport evolves, that part will evolve with it.